Hello from Hemmingford, Quebec, everybody. I'm David Smith, Data Smith on Lichess, and this is the report on round one of the Hemmingford Chess Club's Saturnalia quads. So, round one's done. Finally, the last game was played yesterday, I believe, or that might have been Tuesday. The last game was played. Ironically, for a Thursday night tournament, not a single game was actually played on Thursday night. They were all played at alternate times, which seems to be a pattern that's occurring more and more, and something that, in fact, we're going to have to look at for the future, because part of the goal of the club is to hang out together on Thursday nights, and if people's schedules aren't allowing that, we need to look at perhaps changing the time or other formulas for our events. Anyway, that's to discuss in the new year. In the meantime, in tournament news, we had one bit of very bad news yesterday, or the day before, I guess, when I had a note from Dominic, Dark Tiger, in Section A, who was supposed to be my opponent on Tuesday night, who had to withdraw not just from the game, but also from the tournament, and for the moment, at least, from future events, which is a real shame. Apparently some personal circumstances have changed for Dominic that means that he won't be able to give the time to chess that he's in the habit of doing. It's a loss for the club for sure, because any player is a loss. Dominic, in some ways more so, because he's been a really faithful participant in most of our events. He's also a great player, one of the strongest players in the group, and one of the most creative players in the group. You could never fail to find interesting moves in one of Dominic's games. So we're sorry to see him go, and we're wishing him the best and hoping that we will see him back again in future events. Anyway, for a bit of chess content, I just wanted to show you quickly what I thought was the most interesting game of round one, which was played in Section A between Ian and Hamze. Hamze had the white pieces. Hamze, otherwise known as Lautish Mycelium, and Ian, known as Lord Puffington on Lichess. So Hamze had the white pieces. Excuse me, tail end of a cold here. Hamze had the white pieces, and as you see up on the board here, he played e4, to which Ian responded with c5. This is the Sicilian defense, of course. He plays very classically, and now Hamze plays what's called the Rossolimo variation, bringing the bishop out quickly. So white exchanges here, knight for bishop. He's hoping to gain something by doubling a set of black pawns, which is true, he's managed to do. On the other hand, he's given up a bishop for a knight, which, despite what we all learn in elementary school, is not necessarily an equal trade. It really depends on the circumstances and the shape of the board. But generally, you try not to give up a bishop for a knight unless there's some particular reason. And here in the opening, that's a bit, I wouldn't say it's an unforced error, but it's a choice that white's made, but it may not be absolutely the best choice. This is all, of course, still book theory, so it's not as if white is playing poorly by doing so. He is, though, going to be deprived of that bishop for the rest of the game. So here we go. This is pretty straightforward development. Now here's an interesting move. Black plays to e5, getting a little bit more access to the center, freeing up, for instance, his bishop now has all this diagonal. Oops, lost those. What he's done, though, is normally playing e5 exposes the f5 and the d5 squares as possible squares for white to use, and so black has to think twice before playing e5. But in this case, these doubled pawns actually are serving a purpose. This pawn on c6 covers d5, and the fianchetto of the bishop means that the g6 pawn is covering f5. So black can get away with playing a little bit more aggressively in the center here. So white continues development, wants to get out his bishop. We move on. And here we see what white is hoping to do here. Clearly he's piling up on the d file, the idea being to support the eventual advance of the pawn to d4. Since there are two black pawns on c5 and e5, black is essentially going to have to probably move this knight back here, bring the c pawn to c3, and only then be able to play d4. So that's a whole process. That'll take 3 moves before he can get there. In the meantime, black has other ideas. Excuse me. Brings out the bishop with the obvious threat of exchanging on f3 here. White makes an unfortunate decision at this point and sticks with their original plan. White does not want to play the queen over to e2 because that would deprive the c3 bishop of e2. So white wants to keep e2 clear and judges that the doubled pawns on f3 are not going to be indefensible. And in fact, black already has a set of doubled pawns as well, so white figures, well, this can't be terrible. So, but at the same time, he's not happy with that bishop on g4 and decides to chase it away with h3. Black has a different view of the relative values of these doubled pawns and decides to exchange right away. And in this position, you can see now the contours of the rest of the game. White basically has a weakened king position, has a set of doubled pawns, and more importantly than the king position being weak, these pawns around the king are in fact obstacles to getting white's pieces over to the king side to defend that king. The black doubled pawns, on the other hand, over here, sure, they're a set of double pawns, and in the endgame they may become weak, but for the moment they're completely invulnerable to attack. The one on c6, for instance, is on a white square. There's no white square bishop available to white, so it would be very difficult to attack that pawn. So black doesn't really have any disadvantage to having a set of double pawns, and black also has a king that is not in any particular danger at this point. And so we'll see how essentially black goes on to exploit the weakness of the king. Immediately playing to d7, attacking this pawn, and the only available piece to defend the pawn is the white king. Black continues, playing g5. Obviously, when you have the opportunity, you have a weakened king's position, or a weakened of your opponent's king position being weak, a pawn storm never hurts. But more importantly, playing to g5 frees up a pathway for the knight to get into the action here, through g6 and then h4. White continues with their original plan, but also realizing they need to get some resources over to the king's side. So the knight comes to e2, the black knight heads to h4. Oh, let's back up just 1 second here. The white queen is going to c3, not because c3 has anything interesting on it, so much as to get the queen off of d2, where it would become vulnerable to an attack and potential forks once the knight arrives on f3. So queen to c3, knight to h4, and here again, white has no real pieces available for the defense. So instead of playing, say, into the corner to be a little bit safer, like here, white is forced to expose his king even more. Otherwise, he would lose the f3 pawn to the knight. So essentially, the king is all alone to defend himself, which is usually not something that ends well. So black decides that obviously the best thing to do here is to open the position as quickly as possible. White can't afford to do anything but recapture because the threat is obviously there, where white would lose material. So white recaptures, which of course activates the black queen. Now things are looking pretty dire for black, and white, sorry. And white's only resource now to defend the f3 pawn is to play the knight back to its original square. Actually, this is the queen knight that's come over to this side, but anyway, when you're playing moves like that essentially are starting to set up the pieces for the next game, you know you're probably in trouble. Then black plays an interesting move, black castles, not because black feels that the king is particularly insecure or anything, so much as he's accomplishing two things here. The fairly obvious one is he's piling up pressure down the f-file here on f3 by lining up the queen and the rook. But he's also activating a threat of a discovered attack on the white queen from the bishop. Black couldn't play e4 before because the bishop on g7 would have been hanging. But by castling, black protects this bishop, and now e4 is a real possibility, as we will see. White wants to get their queen off that dangerous diagonal. And this is interesting. So basically the threat is still, even though there's no attack, the threat is still that black's going to play e4 and then be able to bring the bishop to e5, which will essentially end the game for white. So white has to prevent e4 at all costs, but the only piece available to blockade e4 is the queen, which, as we may or may not know, when you want to blockade a pawn, you don't want to put a highly valuable piece on that square because it's, first of all, it's a waste of a valuable piece, but it's also easy to chase that piece away because any other piece that's worth less than that piece can threaten it. So white plays queen to e4 in the probably forlorn hope that black is going to trade on e4. And here's a case where many of us at our level would actually trade, saying to yourselves, okay, I've got an advantage here. I've always heard that when you're ahead, you should trade the pieces so you could get down into an endgame and win the endgame. The flaw in that logic is that when you're ahead means when you're ahead in material, and substantially ahead in material. Here, black's advantage is not in material, but is a dynamic advantage based on the position of, or the activity of their pieces all around the white king. So trading one of your most powerful pieces, in this case, would actually end up very much hurting the attack. So white could play something like this, for instance, and yes, black still has a better position, but not nearly a winning attack the way he had before. So black refuses the exchange. White proposes it again and hopes to profit from the pin along that diagonal. But black refuses again, now really activating the threat of e4. Forces the queen back to e4, and then black continues to pile up the pressure on f3, and now on f4, because once the rook arrives here on f4, obviously there's going to be the queen on e4 is going to be chased away. So white plays a sort of waiting move because white really doesn't have many other good moves to play. All of their pieces are needed where they are. And so now black basically sacrifices a little bit of material in order to break through to the king. It's a very very nice, elegant little sacrifice. Rook for bishop. But rook for bishop and the opportunity to chase the queen from e4. Queen has to go back. The rook continues to advance. So we sacrifice the other rook. But now black plays e4, and this pretty much wraps up the game. There's basically black has built a mating net around the black king, which is really quite pretty. White blocks here. Black activates their last piece. The king has to advance. There's no other place to go really. Yeah, no other place. The only other move would be this move, but then that fails to the same kind of. I guess the next move would be this. I'd have to look at it in more detail, but white's not saved that way. So the king advances to g4. Check. Again, the only move. Check. The only move. And then a nice little mate with the pawn. Anyway, very lovely game on the part of Ian. White never really got going, never got any counterplay the whole game, which is actually one of the other really interesting elements of the game, is just how well Black managed to suppress White's counterplay. That there was essentially none. All Black had to do was calculate how they were going to break through to the White king, rather than how they were going to balance their threats against the threats of the opponent. Anyway, if you have time, take a closer look at the game. The links are to all the games are on the pairing sheet. If you didn't know that, if you look at the pairing sheet and you see you hover your mouse over the pairing, a link will pop up. You click the link and you go straight to that game, and you get to see how the other players in the tournament are playing. All right, thanks for listening, and we'll talk to you soon. And good luck to everybody in round 2.